sending out nudes of them, sending out embarrassing communications, basically defaming them in the community. And I would have always said that it had to be so deeply shocking and against the conscience of any reasonable person that they shouldn't have to put up with that. But disturbing the peace of the other party has changed, right?
What is going on, everyone? My name is Mark Reel Jr., the Father's Rights Attorney, and you're watching another episode of the Father's Rights Playbook. And on today's episode, I have partner here at Real Father's Rights, Ryan Dreyer, and we are going to talk about what is domestic violence. What does the family code say constitutes domestic violence? Ryan, how are we doing today?
Doing great, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So one of the most common lines we get from our clients, and about 1/3 of the cases we deal with involve domestic violence, is the guy saying, "I never hit her." And while that may be true, and you'll tell them like, hey, that can 100% be true, there are so many other things in the state of California under the family code that are deemed domestic violence. And so I'll pass it off to you, Ryan. So guy comes in, he says, hey, I never hit her. She's filed this restraining order. And we'll break it down into kind of categories. The first one is the obvious easy two, are like domestic violence, sexual violence. So if they're claiming rape, sexual assault, they're claiming you hit them. But there are so many other ways that you can be found to have committed domestic violence. And we'll start off with kind of the first one. And this is one that gets guys into a lot of trouble, which is, I guess, physical in nature, but not physically touching them. And that is blocking them, restricting their movement, or physically threatening them, because a lot of times the guy is just bigger than the female.
Correct, right. So Family Code 6203, physical violence, threats of violence, sexual assault, just as you said, right? Now remember, threats can go almost anywhere. If it is a legitimate threat, or even you don't think it's a threat, or you think it's a veiled threat, the judge can look at that, look at the context, and find that. I had one time where he wrote one text and he said, "I hope you die." Right? And when the judge asked me about that, I said, well, it's just a statement of truth. Every death comes to us all, Your Honor. Judge did not care for that, right? But the other one he sent was, you better watch yourself, pull back the child's propeller, or watch what happens. That was enough for domestic violence. These veiled threats, you might say, watch what happens, and you think, I'm going to initiate legal consequences to you. That's not what the court is going to look at that in a broad spectrum. Watch what happens. That's enough, right? And they say, well, were you scared? Yes, I was terrified. What? I didn't know what he was going to do. Next, we have Family Code 6320. That's the one that opens it all up, right? And I don't want to get ahead of myself, but destroying personal property. So, taking a phone, throwing it on the ground. Hey, even if you own that phone, say that was your plan. You own the phone, but you gave that to them. That's going to be enough.
Well, I'll give you an example on that one. And this is a real life example from similar to a lot of situations and cases we've dealt with. There was an instance where the guy just happened to have the wife's phone, and there was an argument, and then she stormed out and didn't have her phone. And they pled in their moving papers, in their request, that he had taken her phone. Mm-hmm. Now, he'd had her phone before the argument, was using it for a totally legitimate purpose, all these things. But you and I had long conversations about how we were going to address that if that allegation came up and it became a point of contention.
Correct.
So it's not even really what actually happens. It can be the perception thereof.
Definitely. And that's when we're talking about when we're blocking someone's movement. That, again, is a threat. Getting close to them when they're talking. And think about this. When we go back to our definitions in criminal law, like kidnapping is technically just making someone move from one place to another, right? And a lot of guys will also, for taking the phone, it'll be false imprisonment, right? Because they're not allowing them to seek help or do something else. Don't touch the other party's phone. Let's just.
This can be keys. It can be phone. It can be
hiding
wallet.
The keys, hiding the wallet, hiding important documents or information, right? They have opened up domestic violence into a huge spectrum. Let's talk about a couple other things.
Yeah, definitely. I think the big one that we talk about the kind of the veiled threats. Judges don't like that. That's a big one. Another one is something that was added to the family code in 2020, which is the term coercive control. And there is some case law around it now. It's starting to get a little bit of definition, but that's kind of the catch-all argument, especially when an attorney files a restraining order on behalf of a client, is they're probably going to sprinkle in allegations of coercive control because that alone, standalone, can be deemed domestic violence. So Ryan, what is coercive control?
Coercive control can be a couple different things. It can be economic coercive control, and that's going to be that they've been isolated, that you control all the money, that they have no way to go out and get their own food. Say they're a stay-at-home mom, that they don't have access to a credit card, they don't have access to bank cards, that you give them an allowance that barely meets anything. Also can be isolating them from others. But another big one is immigration coercive control. Basically threatening their immigration status, saying, I'm not going to support your application for a visa if you don't do this with me, right? So we have tons of different types of coercive control. We also have the catch-all, remember, that everybody does, disturbing the peace of the other party. And this is the one, if a judge doesn't like your conduct, but they can't put it in any of the others, harassment, annoying, destroying personal property, sexual violence, assault, threats, they can't find it, but they don't like it, they're going to put it under disturbing the peace of the other party. And this is such a broad one. This is where the danger comes, people. Say, well, yeah, I just swore at them and caused them this stuff. I swore at them and I was mean to them in public and all these other things. We have seen, even though the case law says that mean words aren't enough, we have seen judges stretch that disturbing the peace of the other party out to basically come within the fact that the judge didn't like what you did and they thought you were a jerk, right? Now, is this the right interpretation of the law? We completely disagree, but just be aware, especially on a TRO basis, disturbing the peace of the other party is very broad, right? And now disturbing the peace of the other party traditionally was sending out nudes of them, sending out embarrassing communications, basically defaming them in the community.
Yeah.
And I would have always said that it had to be so deeply shocking and against the conscience of any reasonable person that they shouldn't have to put up with that. But disturbing the peace of the other party has changed, right? Yeah. And the other one, again, you guys, is destroying personal property or destroying property, punching holes in walls. I've had one where the guy got a restraining order because they were driving in the car and he punched the windshield and it cracked. And she was terrified because of the violence and everything else. So you've really got to think, is what I'm doing provocative? Will it cause them extreme distress? Yeah. Or could a judge see that as it causing extreme distress?
Yeah, I've even seen, I had a case, I came in after the restraining order, but the basis for the restraining order was a very public argument between the two of them occurred at a gathering at their house. He went and got in the family minivan, gunned it, fishtailed, destroyed fence on their property, and that was enough to trigger destruction of property.
Right. Right.
So understand the very unfortunate part of this and why you need to truly understand what you're going up against is that there are so many different areas of the family code around domestic violence that can be stretched or morphed to fit around really any behavior.
Can I add one more?
Yeah.
So you have OnStar or you have an AirTag on your car and the wife is using it or your girlfriend is using it or you've given it to them and they leave one time and you go and you track them down and you find where they are. And say you see them hugging on another man, right? That's domestic violence. I've seen that. You're tracking your own car. That may be. You may have every right to do so. But if you show up and you use that tracker to monitor their movements and try to change their actions, I've seen that be domestic violence.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the moral of the story really around what is domestic violence and avoiding it is that most guys don't take a step back and cool off, whether it be continuing to argue, the veiled threats. I mean, to be very candid, we don't see a ton of where there was physical violence. And honestly, usually when there was physical violence, there's usually a really strong argument that it was mutual. that was really going both ways. It's an unfortunate situation, but the vast majority of restraining orders are granted because of text messages, because of really just the guy coming across as not a good person when they testify.
Yeah. Also, I mean, if you're one of those people that you want to keep them in line, so I don't want any allegations of domestic violence, so I have a camera in every room and they're always being tracked. That's another one of coercive control or disturbing the peace of the other party.
Yeah.
Before you send something, in this day and age, if you have a rocky relationship, you need to assume that everything that you put in writing, every picture that you take, every word that you say can and will be used against you in a court of law.
Yeah. If you wouldn't be okay reading it in front of a judge, you shouldn't send it.
Correct. 100%.
All right. Well, thank you, Ryan. For our listeners and viewers, this was part 2 of our series on domestic violence. If you're listening to this, you want to learn more about the restraining order process in California, go back and listen to the previous episode. And for everyone else, we'll talk to you next week on our 3rd episode in our series about domestic violence restraining orders. I'm Mark Reel Jr. This is the Father's Rights Playbook.